Welcome back to the Nature of Mental Health. Thanks for joining me again, and if it's your first time, welcome. On this episode, we are joined by Ally-Anne Rigoli-Redd. Ally-Anne is an ecosomatic nature-based therapist, yoga teacher, writer, and hedgewitch. She works with folks experiencing an array of mental health challenges to reweave the ecological self and find healing through relationship with nature. She specializes in integrating ancestral embodied animism, which involves the return to the seasonal rhythm, earthen ritual and spirituality, and the wisdom of plants. Toward the end of today's episode, we share and discuss a couple pictures that are quite beautiful. We invite you to hop over to YouTube at The Nature of Mental Health to check out the video. Get ready as we dive deep into ecosomatic practices, ancestral animism, and the power of ritual in healing. Welcome to The Nature of Mental Health, the podcast where we explore how time outdoors supports emotional well-being, resilience, and healing. I'm your host, Will Henry, clinical social worker, nature-informed therapist, and founder of Riverstone Mental Health Collective. Join me as we dive into practical tools, meaningful conversations, and inspiring stories that help us reconnect with the natural world and ourselves. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Nature of Mental Health. I'm very happy to welcome Ally-Anne Rigoli-Redd to the show today. Ally is a fellow graduate of the Center for Nature-Informed Therapy in Baltimore, Maryland. So welcome, Ally. I'm really glad you're here.
Thanks. I'm very excited and happy to be here.
I wanted to start out and ask you to tell us a little about yourself and like the work you do at Chesapeake Mental Health Collaborative there in Baltimore.
Yeah. A little about myself. Well, I'm a nature-based therapist. I do a lot of eco-somatic work, um, really focusing on helping people rewild their embodied relationship with the natural forces at work. Um, my work at Chesapeake, so I facilitate one-on-one individual therapy through them. The majority of my sessions I hold outdoors, so I'm not in the office very often,
Love
but
that.
it's great. It really helps with, like, the whole burnout thing as a
I
as
bet.
a clinician.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I don't only see clients through them, I actually just started seeing clients through another place called Wildflower Wellness. And yeah, it's this, same work outdoors, seeing clients one-on-one. I've been a part of some groups before, but right now my, main focus has been on individual sessions, but I have been branching out. So lately I've been doing what I'm calling therapeutic or embodied foraging walks, and
Hmm.
maybe we can talk a little bit more about that and, the role that plant life plays in our mental health and connection with
Sure.
nature
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah.
But I do that in a group as well. They're small, intimate groups, 2 to 5 people, and I have been loving it. It's been very fulfilling, and I feel like it really helps me bring together all of the pieces of healing in a group space where we can also not only build on that relationship with, the other, like, the more than human world, but also with the human beings that are there as we're all tapping into that same presence.
That same presence. I love that connection. Excuse me, between us all and the earth, right?
Yeah.
How did you come to this path to be a nature therapist? Like what brought you to this work?
There's a long story to that. So the the short and sweet of it is I was studying forensic psychology in my undergrad, and for the longest time, I had been determined to become a forensic psychologist. I still am fascinated by and love forensic psych, but there was something that didn't, no pun intended, but, like, sit well with me about that. It was, I don't know, this idea of being indoors so much and, like, just taking a very analytical lens that where I would be mostly doing assessments and spending a lot of time in the courtroom. Again, all things that I still think are interesting. But I'd read The Nature Fix by Florence Williams, and I had read so many other books about our connection with the more than human world. But it wasn't until I read that book where she mentioned somewhere in there something about nature therapy that I was like, oh, and it sort of clicked that that was an option for me.
Mm.
So I pretty much decided right then and there to do a 180 and focus the rest of my research in my undergrad on nature-based therapy. um, of course, it was still through like a more forensic lens there, but then I decided to get my master's in mental health counseling and pursue post-grad training so that I could do this work. And it's interesting because before, when I wanted to do forensic psych, being a therapist wasn't anywhere in
On the
there. I
table.
didn't
Yeah,
really
yeah.
like, I didn't think I wanted to be a provider of that in
Mhm.
particular. And there was just something that really clicked about it, and I think the piece that clicks, or one of the things that clicks about it, is that like I don't consider myself like the leader
Mm.
in the session with a client. I actually, in the first session, often describe myself to them as like a psychopomp, because, or like a ferryman, if you think about a mythic ecology.
Love it.
Yeah, or fairy woman, the person or the being that's helping guide somebody or co-journey with somebody through that like time and space of connecting with whatever is coming next in their transition. And so I view everything that we're doing in a therapeutic space. I mean, at all times, but especially in a therapeutic space where we might be dealing with things with names like trauma, grief, anxiety, depression, XYZ, dissociation. There's some kind of transition that we are a little stuck in, or something isn't being mobilized or metabolized, or there's a loss. I mean, most of the time there's also a loss of connection to the ecological self. And so viewing myself as one piece and all of the other beings that we're surrounded by as like my co-therapist, like we're all of these psychopomps coming together to be with this person on that path, on their journey, or I'll call it like their imrama, which is a Gaelic word for journey, or like sea voyage
Love
from
it.
one place to the next. I feel like that is something that all sort of came to me at once when I thought of, okay, therapy doesn't have to be this traditional talk therapy.
Right.
You sit there and we just talk the whole time. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, of course,
For
we are
sure.
still doing so much talking, but we're not just talking about things that have
Right.
happened.
That's beautiful. I think that's wonderful. And having that shift and that realization sounds like it was a pretty distinct, like, well, shift to use the word again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was reading your bio, right? Ecosomatic therapist, which I think is, can you talk to that for a second? Ecosomatic and
Hmm.
break that down for a moment?
Yeah. Ecosomatics is it's a word that doesn't have like one exact definition because it's been an emerging field for the last 20 or so years. But for me, ecosomatics is like the tool that helps us get into an ancestral embodied animism state, which I know that's like a lot of words there. So if, the idea is reweaving the ecological self, that is inherently relational, but it's happening through like eco, like the eco, the soma, and the psyche, and all of that I consider to be encompassed by or part of the same puzzle of spirit.
Hmm.
And so when we're becoming more embodied, so if ecosomatics is a tool to be embodied, we are fully embodied when we're awakening to the felt sense and connection to the mysterious intelligence that animates all of life.
Love that.
And so, yeah, ecosomatics is like all of the things that you can learn and ways of being that ultimately are just bringing you back home to your body. Like this is, if our body is the vessel through which we're experiencing ourselves and everything, then we're constantly feeling, but we've been taught to, like, live in this state of, like, I mean, mind over matter or, like,
Yeah.
mind over body. I
Mhm.
think, therefore I am, which is, you know, not really the key to being in full relationship with ourselves.
Right. That's absolutely true, and I love that you use the word reweaving. You reweave because it immediately made me think of, um, the fabric. I thought my first thing was fabric, fabric of society, fabric of the world, fabric of a connection, and how everything is so woven together. I thought that was just a beautiful way to frame it.
Well, thanks. Yeah. I like to phrase it as like we're all ecosomatics is helping us embody our unique threads in the fabric of cosmic creation. So
Mm,
we have that, like, we're actualizing our sovereignty while also embodying our relationship and interconnectedness, our interdependence with all of life.
all of life. Love that. And
Yeah.
then also in your bio, you mentioned that you are a hedgewitch. Please
Yes.
elaborate. Tell me more. What does it mean, and how does that how is that relevant to your work?
Yes, that's a good question because it's something. So I guess I'll start at the beginning without going into too much detail. Um, when I was a kid, like very young, my dad raised me to, um, he raised me as a witch. Like that was the word that he used. When I was about 8 years old, he made a little book for me that was called, I think it's called like Daddy's Book of Magic or, whatever, like Daddy's Book of Witchcraft. And the whole the book is there's like there are like those sheets where you put paper into, like the plastic sheets where you're putting
Mhm,
paper into, it was very simple,
mhm,
but it was essentially just about this idea of like coming into your power. So the same idea of like embodying your own life force, truly embodying your own vessel.
mhm,
And being in relationship with the cycles and rhythms of the seasons, and a huge part of it was the this concept of like the other world or like the spirits that are available to us, ancestors, the spirits of plants, of animals, of rock and stone. So essentially what animism is, but with this additional element of like connecting through the other world.
mhm,
And I just use the term otherworld, but it can, go by so many different names and have different personalities and ideas associated with it depending on the culture. Um, but I like when I started to get older, I didn't reject the term, but I kept it really close to my heart. So I had like an altar space and everything, but I hid it in a closet so that like when people were coming over, they wouldn't see it because I started to learn that like, oh, that was weird. Like that's a weird
mm,
thing to
right.
believe in. You're a weird kid, and all around, generally, I was a weird kid. Like I'd had a bunch of rats that I'd bring to school, and there were a lot of things that were strange about me, and I was perfectly okay with that.
Good.
But I started to become protective over who gets to know this about me, and over time, I started to feel like a sense of shame or discomfort around it. At the same time, it was very much a sense of, like, home to me to come back to those practices, that earth-based and earth-centric way of being, but to share that with other people is where some of that, like, embarrassment and discomfort started to come
Gotcha.
up.
I
Yeah.
do think it's important to acknowledge that, I don't know how many millennia, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. You mentioned seasonal living and cyclical. That is the way of life. That has been the
Mhm.
way of life for long before Abrahamic religions, long before all of that, were established and all of those things. That is the way
Yes.
people lived. And so returning to, which struck me that you returning to that, coming home to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely that. It's a homecoming, and so I came back to the I got away from those practices in my teenage years, and then I came back to them when I was like 19 or 20. And I kept having this like sense, like this calling to bring that into this work, bring that into the therapeutic space and whatnot. And I still had that sense of like, people are going to like think this is weird, or I don't know if anyone's going to resonate with this. And the deeper that I went into my own practice, the more I realized that, it doesn't really matter what word people use. Like witch is a newer term, and it can be really silly to some people, but, you don't you can call it whatever you want. For me, it was just something that has a personal story attached to it,
Mm.
and so using that word as a way of being with that story, and but at the end of the day, that embodiment is something that, you know, is our birthright, every human being, all of our birthrights, and, yeah, so anyway, which was something that I used for a really long time, but kept kind of to myself. And then hedge witch in particular is a witch who it's called hedge because there's like a double meaning there. So on the one hand, the hedge is like the boundary space where all of the plants are growing and you can go to collect the magic and make relationship with plants and like do foraging and make medicines and all of these things.
Mhm.
So it hedge is relating to the actual relationship with plant life. And then it's also relating to being on this boundary of like here and this form of reality and connecting to what is available on the other side of it. And so for me, that I don't view that as like actually separate. I view that boundary, like the boundary itself is like how embodied are we? Because the more grounded I am into my vessel, the more access I have with those other animate forces of nature. And this is again a wisdom that cultures for like all cultures for like thousands and thousands of years, more tens of
Yeah,
thousands of
tens of
years,
thousands, yeah.
yeah, have been like connecting with. And so that's where that term, comes from, or what the significance is to me, how it might relate to therapy and being like this psychopomp, because it's that same thing of like being on that boundary, being in the in between space of like my client is here, they're coming to me because they don't want to be right here anymore, but they need someone to co journey with them to get over here, whatever that looks like. So that same kind of concept of like being in the in between with them is,
That's
being I'm
beautiful,
with them
wow.
through that hedge, like, we're crossing that hedge together, we're hedge riding together, if that makes sense.
It does, and that's one of the I think I mean, I that's beautifully said, and I think that, that goes right in a lot of the nature therapy, we talk about metaphor a lot, and you're speaking really well speaking well to that, the metaphor of co-journeying with our clients, right?
Yeah,
And being there with them. That was really wow. You mentioned earlier, ancestral embodied animism.
yes,
Go on about that. Tell me more about that.
yeah, um, I kind of I know I touched on it a bit before, but the best way that I describe it is the felt sense of awakening to and connecting with the intelligent mystery that animates everything, and so that involves like a receptivity to like the spirit that's everywhere, and that those can be spirits of people, spirits of plants, spirits of stone, spirits of animals, spirits of place, of bioregion as an extension of us and us an extension of place. um yeah,
That's
and this
yeah.
is that's something even that people can, you don't have to have. Like, you can be Christian and still, I think, come into that. I mean, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but in, like, if you go back to, like, the original teachings of Abrahamism, this idea of, like, spirit or God being alive in everything, people can still connect with that, that same sense. Um, Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
like, that divinity that's within everything, both as again, both as, like, sovereign, so that's, like, the animist piece, so where everything has its, like, individual unique thread,
Okay.
and then in that interconnectedness, we're, like, we're all coming together and we're all soup together, like, we're all connected. And so being able to tap into that and ultimately awaken our inherent indigeneity, but again, through a felt sense. So actually feeling that in the body, not something that like we're just getting information through the head and thinking, okay, scientifically, yes, everything is connected. That's so different from having a felt sense of it where you can
Right.
feel at your fingertips the fact that like my desk is alive in a way.
And we're all connected, and that felt sense of presence. I love that. There's a felt sense of being, I think, is really important. And when you speak about connection to each other, and we go back to that fabric, the fabric of life, where each person, each plant, each spirit, each, and you go back, we're talking about like historically, ancestral worship is something that people have been doing for millennia as well, right? You honor your ancestors, you honor those that came before you. And I'm thinking in like person wise, ancestral, you think about how would you describe that with relation to like the earth, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I realize I didn't fully answer your question because I'm sort of describing embodied animism, but the piece that I specialize in, or one aspect of it is that, like you're saying, that ancestral embodied animism.
Mm.
And there are a couple pieces there. The big one being what you're saying of like we are all inherently indigenous to this planet. We're all native to Earth. So we don't have to be aware of exactly how our ancestors were connecting in this way for us to be able to do it through our bodies now, because our bodies, like, we are the amalgamation of our ancestors in on so many levels. I mean, it's just
Right.
fascinating. And then the other piece to that, which is the piece that I really love working with my clients with, and I wanna bring more into, like, group work and workshops, is connecting with, going back, okay, how did my my last ancestors that had traditions around connecting with that felt sense, around remaining embodied, how did they do it? What did their traditions look like? How can I connect with that? And of course, for a lot of us, we don't really know either because they didn't have a written language at that time, because the written language was eradicated because of colonization, any
Hmm.
of the reasons. So like you don't have to have a PhD in your own ancestral background to do this, because the more embodied you are, the more
Yes.
we're able to like access those memories through our own bodies. Again, if we're the amalgamation, or like the sum of that history, then we can tap into that, through our vessels, if this is where that life force is residing in this particular incarnation. So I do love bringing in those pieces. So for me, like I bring in a lot of uh, Celtic animism practices, specifically more Irish paganism than some others, because that's where I know I have more ancestral connection. And there's some uh, Italian I mean, I'm half Italian. I'm more Italian than I am Irish. But it's a little harder to have information about that, when you are going all the way back, but that's okay because I connect with that through the ways that I know how and the ways that feel natural to me. And so I love bringing in those pieces of like how can you connect back with those traditions and make your own that feel rooted in that wisdom.
Absolutely. How do you integrate that into a like a session or your work? How does that integrate in like specifically or anecdotally or however you want to explain that?
Yeah. It really depends, of course, as you would know, it depends on the client, but usually that's a piece that might come in a little bit later, but I view all of my work, with every client, regardless of what they're coming in with, as embodiment work to a certain extent. Whether they're coming in with trauma, grief, anxiety, identity, dissociation, these different experiences, um, there's a level, I think I might have already even mentioned this earlier on, but there's a level of like maybe being stuck somewhere. There's like
Mm,
metabolizing that needs to happen. And so through anchoring back into the body and building somatic capacity, we're better able to, because again, the modality that I'm using primarily is a lot of ecosomatics, which is inherently relational and systemic. We're doing a lot of this like constellation work that can, we're both expanding capacity and building awareness around what what has happened or what stories are here in my lineage that I have access to or that I can connect with either on like a shared like verbal or written story level, like someone has told me this or I know this has happened,
mhm,
or on a felt sense, what is, if we're doing some nervous system mapping or, connecting with memories or images that are coming up through the body when people are able to drop down into like an alpha brainwave state or things like that. So the a lot of like the things that we would be doing in traditional therapy, like expanding your window of capacity, um, different things polyvagal wise, all of these different pieces, I'm just applying them to a broader lens, a broader, more ecological lens. Ecologically with the land, land is ancestor and
mm,
living spirit, living relative,
mhm.
and that human history as well. So I know that's like still probably pretty vague. It's
Oh,
just always difficult to answer when
sure.
every client is so
So
different.
different, right, and it's
Yeah.
well, how does, like, when you were speaking about local ecology and, like, bioregion relevance, you said earlier, how was that bioregion, how is that relevant? You
Yeah.
mentioned that earlier.
That's a really big part of like reconnecting with or reweaving the ecological self, returning to that idea. Like, so rarely do I hear people or when I'm, reading books about like connecting with yourself or, identity work and whatnot. So rarely do I see any information that's including place or including the land that the bioregion that we grew up in or the bioregion of our ancestors. And the land is holding those memories. Like the land has watched us and been with us through, whatever it is, wherever we were, even if like you were constantly moving around growing up. Everywhere that you are an extension of the space, and the space is an extension of you. So
You're connected.
yeah, you're connected, which might sound a bit redundant at this point, but one of the things we know is that the most healing that we get out of being with nature isn't necessarily the physiological benefits of exposure. Those are awesome, those are
Those are
major,
awesome,
but
right?
it's meaningful interaction,
Mhm.
which you probably know, I'm sure. Um, and so, like for example, in my embodied foraging walks, I'm helping people connect back with their bodies so that, well, they're connecting with their bodies to connect with the plant so that I'm not really the teacher. I'm like the psychopomp and I'm giving them information, but their bodies and the plants are the real teachers. Like those are the
Mm.
ones that are helping them do the deepest remembering. As they are building these bonds with the plants in their local ecology, or they're turning their attention back to the bioregion and like, what role did this play as I was growing up? What role does this play right now? Who's making the air that I breathe? Who is, where is the food that I'm eating growing? Then we start to realize how much more is available to us in terms of support and relationship when we start talking about like attachment theory and
Mhm.
attachment healing. Like what is our how is that reflected, our attachment style reflected in the land? How is it maybe different? And how can that teach us or guide us back into a relationship with ourself that can then mirror our needs and relationships with other humans? So, I mean, there's so many different pieces there, but yeah, I personally just, I mean, I love all things in nature. I consider myself a naturalist, which, like, we're all naturally naturalists, right? I like to learn about the wildlife and the plants, but I really love learning about the plants. Like, I feel a very strong kinship with that wild wisdom there. So a lot of my work is on helping people connect back with the plants that are growing in their backyard.
I love that, and you do the foraging walks, which is a new offering you have, you said, or you're newly, um, expanding that? And that sounds really fascinating. How you mentioned seasons earlier and seasonal living.
Mhm.
How does that play into your work?
Yeah, that is, my other or, like, primary sort of area of focus and specialization, and if we think about, like, this is embodied animism, like or, like, ancestrally embodied animism is how we're facilitating a lot of healing or where a lot of the healing is happening, then all of that is relational. So it's about coming back to that relationship through the body. And then the way that we get to that relationship, at least the way that I facilitate it, is by returning to rhythm and ritual. And rhythm, the rhythmic piece is coming back to the ecological cycles, like the wisdom of natural time, which is the only time that actually exists. Whether we like that or not, it's the only
That's
time that
yeah,
actually
huh.
exists. And so, being that we are ecological beings, we are the seasons as well. They happen through us. They're moving up and through us. We are expressions of summer right now, at least here in the Northern Hemisphere,
Mhm.
as opposed to them happening around us. So, for example, like our entire gut microbiome changes every season.
I did
And
not know that.
yeah, our
That's
gut
fascinating.
microbiome changes. Our circadian rhythm is constantly adjusting. Those rhythms are, not things that just marks that show up on the calendar, but they are living and shifting. And as we breathe and, walk the land and exist, we're co-creating life with the seasons. And so, um, everything, like every rhythm, every natural rhythm follows the same arc of expansion and then contraction. Like our breath cycle, our life cycle of birth, life, death, the circadian rhythm, the women's menstrual cycles, every cycle, the cycles of the seasons, they all follow the same arc of like expansion and contraction. And we have, really fallen out of rhythm with that. And our bodies, the ego, the soma, the psyche is hurting because of that. And I don't think that is I should say, I think that's like a symptom of, a greater disconnect that's happened. But
100%.
being yeah, being in relationship with that and coming back to again, this is where like the ancestral embodied animism piece comes in, or of course, this is how we're facilitating that. How did our ancestors connect back with that? What was their way of being in relationship with time? So many have had their own way of marking those moments that happened so that they can embody them and as we're moving through, like, the rhythms and cycles of nature and of time, we have to remain present, and if we're remaining present, then we have the somatic capacity to do so, and we're better able to mobilize the grief that we're experiencing throughout life. We're moving through these transitions and, every day of, rites of passages and, whatever else might be going on. So there's just so much that I could go into there
Yeah,
that I'm like,
that's a that's
"Ah."
a that's a big door to walk through, right?
It's a huge
Wow.
door to walk to. We're just, like, dancing this continuum of
And
of cyclical time that and we're not aware of it, and that's
that's
a
the
huge piece of this, like, disembodiment that's happened. And so when we're able to, like, anchor back into that and be with that's where, like, the plants and ritual comes back into this too. Like, if I'm moving through I do my walks once a month, and we're able to, like, be with and map the shifts in the land. What's the life cycle that's happening throughout us right now in our local ecology, and how is that both both shaping and reflecting the shifts of my primary ecology, so my own body? And how is that related to what's going on up in the mind, which is still, like, happening all through the body? So how am I able to, like, anchor back in through that so that what needs to be expanded, released, moved, processed is able to?
yeah, and you speak so much about being present, being in the moment, being, mindful. D I speak so much about that, and what you're saying is so articulate into to
Oh,
bringing that
thanks.
into nature. Yeah, it's wonderful. Um, you mentioned ritual and, like, we've been talking about spirituality and ritual. How does that play into this?
Yeah, so, if the relationship is here and, like, that ancestral embodied connection, and we're doing that through and ritual, then the ritual piece comes in, and ritual is how we actually, I would say, remain embodied in those connections to the spirit world that is alive and everything, to everything that's happening. So, um like rituals that we're having around the seasons. And ritual doesn't have to be something that's like super profound or like
Mhm.
major, but
Right.
just like these small pieces that ground us, just like our
Action.
ancestors. Yeah, they bring us connection, and for our ancestors, ritual was kind of always a way of like keeping yourself like kind of catching up with where things are at, or being with essentially being with, like, being
Right.
present
Being
with
present.
whatever
Yeah.
it is that's happening so that we're not, like, getting stuck there. Of course, what the ritual is for very much depends, and so in a clinical sense, for example, like if we are unburdening and releasing like a part that is holding a lot of grief, or is holding a lot of hurt that hasn't been realized, that hasn't known compassion or love, then the when we finally have built that capacity and we're about to release, then the release might be facilitated through an actual ritual.
Right.
The building capacity part, if we're feeling stuck there, then we might do that through ritual. If we are at very, very beginning stages of not having a lot of capacity and learning how to expand our awareness, then we will create small rituals at, again, another one of those like expansion and contraction cycles, the cycle of day. So we might start with something very small when somebody wakes up in the morning, and then something very small at the end of the day that then helps us like graduate toward where we're going so that the water can keep flowing essentially.
It kind of marks the movement almost, right? You're kind of marking the connection, marking the movement, the presence. It's like
Yeah.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. exactly. So it keeps us embodied, and like the ritual, the spirituality piece too, on an ancestral level, bringing in the the myth part of it is just so amazing. That's so fun, connecting back with what were the stories that what do these stories that my ancestors were connecting with, what does that share about, you know, what I'm dealing with right now, or, whatever else it is, being able to connect back with that is can be really powerful for people, or turning their own stories into myth that has like, what's the meaning there if if I take this experience that's this narrative and create I fictionalize it a little bit the way that our ancestors have always done. There's a lot of power in that, not because we're trying to rewrite history, but because we're like making meaning of something, and we're able to, again, better integrate that into our present. It's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And you have sent me a picture, which I
I
would
did.
like to can we pull up and talk about this? Which
Yes. I think the altar photo. Yeah,
okay, here we go. You can see it?
I can.
Nice.
Can you
This
see it?
is I certainly can, and it's
Okay,
beautiful.
cool.
So
Yeah,
tell me about this. What's going on?
so when we're talking about ritual and mental health, I know it can feel really abstract, so I wanted to give an example. So this is a very small portion in the center of my own altar right now that I actually put together in an eco-somatic training that I'm doing at present. And when we talk about, I wanted to bring this up and use this as an example because I know it can be a little bit intangible or feel like out there or difficult to capture when we talk about what does that look like in clinical work, or how can that apply to mental health, and this idea of like embodiment, what does that have to do with anything? So I went on a walk out in nature, and I started by asking the beings that were present to make themselves to communicate with me if they wanted to connect and be part of my own journey, so my own imrama, back to myself in building capacity. So right now, one of my personal goals is to build more capacity around creative life force. So if I think of like creativity, or like anxiety, a lot of the time is just a part of us that really wants to be expressed.
Mhm.
And so my goal is to expand my capacity to be with my actual life force energy. And so those are like, very spiritually sounding terms, but when we put that into a clinical sense, again, that like how that manifests in me and how I see it manifesting in a lot of my clients is anxiety, because there's a part of us that wants to come out. And then there are these stories of like, well, what's happened to me in the past when I've tried to come out, when
Mm.
I've tried to be expressed. Okay, there's like now I'm starting to feel shame. Now there's another part of me that's coming in and is like criticizing me because they're trying to protect me. Because if they just criticize me enough, then I won't put myself out there in this way, and I won't like feel embarrassed, and I won't essentially make the shame worse. So I'm like, there's this cycle that happens, and again, this is just one example.
Mhm.
But so with that being my goal, being able to expand my capacity to be present with and, like, trust that I can hold my own life force, or that my vessel was perfectly made for that, I went out on this walk and invited the beings to be part of that journey with me. And so there at the bottom, you see red ochre, who I actually have right here on my
Nice.
desk. I moved the red ochre just for today. And I didn't actually like know. It's not like when I was out there, any of these beings outright communicated to me, "This is the reason," or like, "This is the intention, this is the symbolism." I was able to feel some of that when I was there, but it wasn't until I just let my body guide me through putting it together that it started to take on a stronger meaning and like make sense. So at the bottom there, red ochre now has been established as like the anchor. And so my anchor that is helping me remember my body as the actual vessel, as capable of holding my life force. I collected cleavers that you see right, they're like dried up on the sides now. They're actually
Mhm.
like stuck to the cloth because that's what cleavers will do. And that one to me was kind of obvious. I was walking and I had taught about cleavers at my last foraging walk, and a bunch of them just like stuck to me. And
Hello.
so I was like, okay, hello. And this makes a lot of sense because even how cleavers are working in our bodies on a medicinal level is like they're pulling, they're pulling, they're pulling. So
Mm.
the cleavers here, when I look at that, I'm feeling there's a felt sense of like my spirit or like my life force being drawn back into my body, into my vessel. And I have snakeskin there. The snakeskin, the egg, and the oyster shell, I didn't really know why. I just like put them together. The oyster shell, I didn't find outside. That was from one that I had eaten actually. But the snakeskin, I was having these dreams of like me summoning a snake, and I didn't really know why. And then these other beings showing up in my dream to like essentially trying to stop me and make me stop. And as I was putting this together, I was starting to feel grounded, and like the cleavers trying to summon in that like presence, my own presence into my body, and the snake skin as like, there are as as I'm doing that, there are habits and patterns that are not helpful that keep me in the same cycles and routines that have to be shed and I have to be willing to let go of. And then we have the eggshell here that symbolizes the new beginnings that come after we do that shedding. And the oyster, again, I didn't know at first why, but now when I go and I look every day, reminds me that I have to listen deeply to my body as an expression of the earth, coming back down to that red ochre. I have to be perceptive to what is rising up and through me, willing to let go of whatever is not in alignment with that, to stay open to, what happens and what comes afterwards.
Wow.
So this is just sort of like an example of how we can establish these practices that help us remain embodied and connected to the ecological rhythms so that we can continue to move, so that we can continue to dance the spiral of life and cyclical time.
Mhm.
Um, that is something that has been practiced for a very long time,
Yes.
connecting with these beings, placing them together and arranging them in a way that is communicating what your needs are to you and reminding you of yourself. That's an extremely ancient practice.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And we had an episode on nature mandalas, which was really great, where we did some of this kind of work. And so this what you're saying is really it's really powerful because really meaningful, I think is the word I want to use. And the way you're framing that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, a few days later, I ended up doing a summer solstice ritual where I took red ochre. The ritual was to help me draw down that like expansive energy of the sun, illuminate those parts of me that I'm not yet inhabiting, and expand my capacity to, direct my own life force, and which essentially, in clinical terms, when you translate it that way, be okay with, whatever anxiety comes up or doubt that comes up and be able to like move through that, move with that and have compassion, which is so much of my work, with my clients, depending on what.
Self-compassion and kindness to yourself and being that's so much time in my office is spent talking like that about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have a picture
Yeah.
of the red ochre, right? Is that the other picture?
Yeah, that's the other one. You can
Let me
share
share
that.
that. Yeah, let me share that. So here, let me go here. Because that was a really cool picture too, I think. It's really there we go.
Yes. It's a little bright, so I don't know
Yeah, it's all right.
how well, but that's all good. Yeah, so this was me at the creek when I had finished up my ritual, and I let this be very intuitive. I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't exactly know how I was gonna get there because this was actually a pretty bad day. This was right after we had so many plans for solstice, and then, my dog herniated a disc, and we spent the whole day in
No.
the ER.
Oh,
So, it
jeez.
was rough, but at the end of the day, even though the sun was, like, barely out anymore, I made sure that I got out there and I did this because I figured, it doesn't have to be perfect,
No.
and this is what I need.
That in itself is a practice.
Yes, it
Doing
is.
something that doesn't have to be perfect. And that
Yeah,
is, yeah, one of my
very much
practices all the
so.
time.
Yeah. It's
Thank
definitely a
you so much for
practice.
yeah, for sure. Thank you. So I'm gonna stop sharing this now. That is wonderful by the water, in particular. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That's really remarkable. I wanted to before we end here, wanted to get you mentioned in your bio that you were a writer, and I thought I would give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the writing and where can we find it, what is it about, what do you like to write about?
Yeah. So I don't have anything, traditionally published or anything like that. Um, but that's where I feel my most creative self. And I've always loved writing. So, I write a lot of poetry and I do creative nonfiction nature writing. So there are books that I am working on, and again, I would love to put my poetry together in books as well. But the right now you can connect with that on like a you know, smaller level through my Substack. I have a monthly newsletter that I just started doing where I keep it very brief. It's essentially just like a little bit of my reflections on the season. And then I provide information about, what's in season, local ecology wise, so wild foods, what kind of produce can you get? A lot of people don't think about meat and dairy, how those have seasons as well, and the fish that's in season. And then I'll talk about the solar cycles, the lunar cycles to help people connect back with that. It's
Mhm.
basically just like a brief companion guide throughout the year to help
Love that.
keep keep us grounded in that time. And so on Substack I'll also, write little things here and there. And I'll be sharing more of my writing through the YouTube format pretty soon as well.
Cool, and that's all at how do we
Yes.
find you there?
Yeah, so they unfortunately, the same handle was not available for everything.
It's always the
So,
case.
yeah,
Yeah.
on Instagram and TikTok, it is the feral therapist underscore. On Substack, it is Ally the feral therapist, and on YouTube, it is just the feral therapist.
Okay, and this will all be in the show notes, so that, it'll all be live links so they can click and go directly to all of that stuff. Um, and, do you have any kind of things coming up, at Chesapeake or I forget the other place you do your work,
Yes. Yes, wildflower wellness. Um,
I got it
I
right.
don't have any. Yeah, you were, like, right there.
Right there.
I don't have anything coming up through them besides my, one-on-one clients if people wanna work together.
Mhm.
I'm based out of Maryland, but I do have my next foraging walk coming up on let's see. My next foraging walk is gonna be on the 18th of July. So in a couple weeks, and that I'm just due through myself. Yeah, so
Nice.
you
So
can you can find, information on that if you join my monthly newsletter. So on my Substack, I have a link tree in my bio on all of my socials that will, tell you how to get there and how to sign up if you're interested.
very nice. Thank you, Ali. I have one last question, and you shared so much like important wisdom, I think, today. If you could drop one like pearl for those looking to like deepen their connection with nature, to be more present, to you know, if you could leave us with one thing, what would it be?
Hmm, one pearl, very simple pearl. Hmm. Yes, so this is something I call reciprocity breath, and I start every morning with this. As soon as I go outside, I empty all of the breath out of my lungs, and before I take my next breath in, I make it a conscious choice to receive the gift of air, of oxygen, of that life force, and I'll allow my lungs to completely inflate. I'll pause at the very top of that breath to fully arrive. And then before I release that breath, I make the conscious choice to give the gift back as it has been transformed through my body and the trees and the plant life are now part of me. I'm giving myself to them. So on my breath out, then I will just go and do it nice and slow and give the gift back. Another thing about doing that too and being slow and intentional about it is that not only is it helping me embody my reciprocal relationship with the rest of nature, but it is helping me embody that same ecological rhythm, that arc of expansion and contraction that moves through all things.
That's
Yeah,
beautiful. What a
thanks.
great pearl to drop. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of
Really
course.
appreciate you being here today, Ali. This was really a wonderful conversation.
I had fun. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Nature of Mental Health. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow, rate, and share the show. It helps others find their way to this community. For more resources, visit riverstonementalhealth.com. Until next time, notice the small spaces where nature meets your day. Stay curious, and may you find resilience in every season.